Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on Hear the Wind Sing by Murakami Haruki. This was Murakami's first novel, and I only just read it last week, despite having read half dozen of his books. In part because this book was not a book that made him an instant star overnight in Japan or internationally. Other works would do that. Norwegian Wood, about a decade later, would certainly catapult him into fame. But Hear the Wind Sing and its companion volume, Pinball 1973, really were not around when I was discovering him 20 years ago. Certainly Kafka on the Shore, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, Norwegian Wood, of course, the Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. These were the books that I could find and read by Murakami and enjoy. Something like, there was this sense that A Wild Sheep Chase was his first sort of real book. Despite the fact that Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973, this sort of companion second novel, they formed the Rat trilogy. So there's the Rat is a character, but there are themes, there are ideas that I certainly found in Hear the Wind Sing that carry through all the way to A Wild Sheep Chase. And so I enjoyed it. It's always interesting to read a writer's first novel. Is it something that reveals, where that writer's going, the trajectory he or she is going to work on throughout a career, or is it something that is sort of a dead end that leads somewhere else, that turn around and head off in a different direction? And so with Murakami, it was interesting to get that and to see how many of the hallmarks of his writing are present right here on the first 120 pages of fiction that he published. And it was enjoyable to get into that. And to see that the dueling tendency of his best works is present right here at the beginning. This dueling tendency of a very realistic world that is grounded and anchored with pop culture references and these details of the real world, the food that a character likes to eat, are present right here from the beginning. But that other aspect of his books and his writing that I think drew and entranced so many readers, which is the surrealism, this idea that a character perhaps has very conscious desires and dreams, about goals, I should say, to achieve, or there are these unconscious aspects, questions about a character's identity, a character's past, the hidden desires for that character, and that somehow that is going to force its way into a character's life. The link between dream and memory and then the choices a character is making for himself usually, but sometimes for herself. The way that collision occurs is present, again, here from the very beginning. It's not overwhelming. This is much closer to Norwegian Wood than Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. But it's a book that reveals all of the tiny little avenues that Murakami would explore in his later fictions. So I did enjoy it. And here's how it starts. It starts with, "There's no such thing as a perfect piece of writing, just as there's no such thing as perfect despair. So said a writer I bumped into back when I was a university student. It wasn't until much later that I could grasp his full meaning, but I still found consolation in his words, that there's no such thing as perfect writing." And he goes on to talk about this. He goes, "If one operates on the principle that everything can be a learning experience, then of course aging needn't be so painful. That's what they tell us anyway. From the age of 20 on, I did my best to live according to that philosophy. As a result, I was cheated and misunderstood, used and abused time and again. Yet it also brought me many strange experiences. All sorts of people told me their stories. Then they left never to return, as if I were no more than a bridge they were clattering across. I, however, kept my lips zipped tight, and so the stories stayed with me until I entered this year, the final year of my 20s. Now I think it's time to tell my story." And so there is this Bildungsroman almost that Murakami has his narrator embarking on. And there's something that feels slightly autobiographical about that. The way that Murakami has this character who's a little bit younger than Murakami was at the time, but this character who's sort of finding his voice, and he's writing his story, he's telling this story. It's a first-person narrator that can be very common across his books. But he goes on to give this reference of this Derek Hartfield character, this writer who died by suicide in the 1930s, who in the narrator's opinion was up there with Hemingway and Fitzgerald among U.S. writers. And that's who he ends with as well. So at the very end of the book, he sort of closes with these reflections on this Derek Hartfield who taught him everything about writing. And it becomes clear in those details who Derek Hartfield is based on. But Derek Hartfield's not a real person. He references uncles who died in the war, in World War II. And so we go on to learn about this character's life. We see him interacting with women, and the Murakami gaze is there right from the beginning, folks. But it's not as strident here. He recalls his relationships with his girlfriends, none of which are particularly significant for him, though they may have been significant for the women. And we meet his friend the rat, who leads a very different life. There's this yearning quality to the narrator. There's a way in which he's almost sort of the Romeo to the rat's Mercutio. The rat feels a little more dangerous, a little less stable. The narrator is in college, and so there are these ways in which they interact with each other. But he starts to have this friendship, this relationship with another young woman, and their interactions are some of the best in the book as well. In a later chapter, the telephone rang. I was in the midst of applying calamine lotion to my face, which was sunburned from my daily trips to the local pool. After 10 rings, I gave up, peeled off the neat checkerboard of cotton squares, and rose from my chair to answer it. Hey there, it's me. Ah, so it's you. What you doing? Nothing much. I patted my stinging face with the towel that was wrapped around my neck. I enjoyed myself last night. First time in a long while. Glad to hear it. So, do you like beef stew? Uh-huh. I just made a whole pot, more than I could put away in a week. Want to come over and help me eat it? Sounds good. Okay, come in an hour. If you're not here by then, I'll chuck it all in the garbage. Got it? But I hate waiting. See ya. She hung up before I could open my mouth. I lay on the sofa for the next 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling and listening to the top 40 on the radio. Then I took a shower, shaved myself smooth and clean under the hot water, put on a pair of Bermuda shorts and a shirt just back from the cleaners. It was a pleasant evening. I watched the sun set as I drove along the coastal road, stopping to buy 2 bottles of chilled white wine and a carton of cigarettes before getting on the highway. And so all of the little details that are in there, Murakami is always wanting to give us the sense of color, of pattern, of fabric within his narrative. He wants to tell us what are the tiny possessions that a person takes on to the date or takes on a job interview. All these little things that he wants to ground his characters' worlds in. And so that is here in Hear the Wind Sing. It's effective. Sometimes it's not quite as incisive as he would be in his later fiction, but the tendency of how he wants to sort of paint in the background of his story is there, right at the start. In a later section, we do get a dream. This is one of the few places where the surrealism and sort of the dreamlike nature of his books really comes through here from the beginning. I had an unpleasant dream. I was a big black bird flying westward over a thick jungle. I was badly wounded, my feathers caked with black blood. Ominous dark clouds were gathering in the western sky, and there was a whiff of rain in the air. I hadn't dreamed for a long time. So long, in fact, that it took me a while to realize what had just happened. I got out of bed, showered off the nasty sweat, and had a breakfast of toast and apple juice. Beer and cigarettes had left my throat feeling stuffed with old cotton. I chucked the dirty dishes in the sink and selected an olive green cotton suit, the most neatly pressed shirt I could find, and a black knit tie. I carried them out to the front room and sat down beside the air conditioner. And he goes on in this vein, but there is this moment of the way he'll push forward into dreams in interesting ways. And then later on in the book, he has this magnificent, almost Kafkaesque moment where he talks again about this Derek Hartfield, and he provides a synopsis of this story of a man who is called the Martian Wells, and he goes and he compares it to Ray Bradbury, and then he has a character who is like climbing into a well and then realizes like there's some weird jump, something's changed with the sun when he comes out of the well. The sun is totally different. The world seems to have changed, and he then he starts hearing this voice, and this "Hear the Wind Sing" seems to be referenced within this story. That there's a voice in the wind that is this individual speaking to him and telling him about what has happened, and this idea that he's jumped like thousands, millions of years through time, and the character's final choice within that scene acts as sort of this parable, and it recalls the Before the Law parable in Kafka's Trial. And so the book really just goes off in a lot of different avenues. It's a book about nothing in a sense, in the way that a number of Murakami's books that are set in the real world are. They don't really seem to be about anything other than this character sort of bumbling through life sometimes making choices, but often sort of just observing and reflecting on other people's choices. And this idea that his choice to not imitate them is the choice he makes. It's this very strange, almost existentialist philosophy that the narrators in Murakami's novels have. But the way that Murakami's sort of probing and sort of peeking his head into the rooms that he'll really dive into and just lay out and paint very clearly for us and turn on all the lights in his later fictions are all right here in Hear the Wind Sing. So I really honestly did enjoy seeing this side. I'm glad that despite not being one of his masterpieces, it has been translated and is available for readers to discover. So let me know if you've read this one. Certainly, as I mentioned, it pushes towards a wild sheep chase, and this one is far more surreal, far more dense. It's also about 3 times the length. But this is, as I mentioned, sort of the first of his books that really kicks forward. And a couple of years ago, I read After Dark, and this one I really enjoyed. I was honestly surprised at how much I enjoyed it. And there are ways in which the much more grounded surrealism of After Dark reminded me of Hear the Wind Sing. And I really did like it. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. Norwegian Wood, as I mentioned, is one that I think this was sort of the one that made him very famous. This is one of the first Murakami novels that a lot of folks read. That if anybody doesn't want the super surrealism from the off, this is the one I think most folks are going to. And I'll link my videos to these in the description box. Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World is probably his best surrealist novel in my reading, if you want to dive in and get a taste of that. Now to talk just a bit about Derek Hartfield, it becomes very clear from his fate and the link to his fate with his mother's death that Derek Hartfield is very much Robert E. Howard in Murakami's world. Other books that I sort of thought of as I was reading this were Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. The episodic nature of it kind of, I think, pairs well with this early novel from Murakami, where he doesn't quite have the transitions figured out, and it can feel a bit episodic at times. And the nature of a reality that is questionable at times, I think, is drawn on there. Also, works like Ubik by Philip K. Dick, I think, come close to approximating that. The attitude of some of Thomas Pynchon's books, Crying of Lot 49, which was published before Hear the Wind Sing, or something like Vineland, which is coming out after. And each of those, I think, come close. Perhaps even the way that we have, Valentine Michael Smith learning what it means to have his culture colliding with Earth in Stranger in a Strange Land. Those are all books that remind me of sort of the strange way that Murakami wants to narrate his book, and the way that he has a transcript of a radio interview and different things like that, the songs he wants to mention. And all of those sort of remind me of these various works from often the 60s. But then I thought of some other early works or first novels. I thought of This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And also the stories in Dubliners by Joyce, where characters are having epiphanies, we're told all sorts of little details to ground the characters. Hear the Wind Sing, I think, picks up on a lot of those same motifs. So if you enjoy those, this might be a good book to read as well. So again, hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.